So in 2005, I wrote my first paper and gave a speech to an international gathering of intellectual property lawyers
Hmm.
on the subject of generative AI, though none of us had heard that phrase at the time.
Hey, peace and blessings to you. My name is Jerry B. I am the entree musician, and so are you. And definitely, without a doubt, the gentleman we're going to introduce you to is an entree musician. He's a songwriter, he's a musician, he's an entertainment attorney, and is one of the most stable voices that I've heard in a long time of thought leaders in this new space that we're entering into as musicians. And it's my heart to just bring him on and just let him go. I think maybe when he comes on, like he is now, I'm just going to like take a back seat because you are going to enjoy this conversation with attorney Don Tomlinson. And I've just got a couple questions, Don. First of all, welcome to the program. But I've got a couple questions. I meant what I said. I'm just going to let you go, bro. How are you today?
You think this is a law school lecture, huh? I just have to take over?
Absolutely. Well, welcome
Well,
to the
hey, dear
podcast,
person, I am
man.
great. Happy to be here.
That's good. That's good, man. I first heard of you just a couple of months ago now, if that, maybe a month and a half, on our good friend Barry Coughing. If you don't know Barry Coughing, musicsupervisor.com. He's a good guy who is trying to do great things in the music industry, especially as far as sync licensing is concerned. And he has these monthly meetings every month, which I attend. And he introduced this gentleman named Don Tomlinson, who just took over the conversation in a great way, made us all put our thinking caps on. And the very first thing I said to Barry on taxes, you got to give me his contact information. And so Don came on to the entree musician community, rattled our brains. We're still talking about the conversation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, man, and I'm just going to go with it. First of all, you please tell us how you got started in music, some of your experiences, and what caused you to become an entertainment attorney. All in that order, if you wouldn't mind.
Don't mind a bit. Let's see. I attended my first concert at age 5. Drove from Texarkana, Arkansas to Shreveport, Louisiana with my father and mother to hear Guy Lombardo.
Ah,
So my father was a big band devotee, and Guy Lombardo was a big deal to him. And so we went over there to see that concert, and I heard Kenny Gardner, who was the lead singer for Guy Lombardo, sing a song called Return to Me. Oh, my dear, I'm so lonely. Hurry back, hurry back, hurry back. You're the one I adore.
mm,
And I think I fell in love with music at that moment.
wow.
I must have. I'm 77, so that was 72 years ago, and I still remember what he sang. So, so I remember standing in the front seat on the way back, about an hour's drive, with a pencil, and I was
Mm,
directing the band like Guy Lombardo had done, and I had never seen that before, and I was all impressed by that. And so I just began a journey of. I will tell you one other little anecdote. So my father had a 45 RPM record changer,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and I was able to buy some records or listen to ones that my parents had. And there was one by Patty Page that I liked in particular called How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?
I remember that, yeah.
How much is that doggy in the window? I do hope that doggy's for sale.
Yeah.
So I sang that song with the record about a million times on the idea that when I learned it and I could sing it just like her, I was going to go into the kitchen where my mother was undoubtedly cooking, late in the afternoon and sing that song, albeit a cappella, to her. And I did. It was quite the lesson because I learned that the crutch of having that record to sing along with wasn't there when I was in there a cappella. And I didn't do a very good job. So I learned right then and there that singing was difficult. And you not only had to have pitch and a good voice and so forth, but you had to understand how to sing, and you had to understand that you needed accompaniment at least at age 5, or 6 or however old I was.
Sure.
So after that, I just stayed musical. I sang my first solo in a 1,500 congregation Baptist church that I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, at age 6. I remember standing in front of the congregation on Sunday morning, singing with the pianist. So I did have accompaniment. I don't remember what song it was, some religious standard, I'm sure. Old Rugged Cross or something, And I remembered how frightened I was, but I also remember what an exhilarating experience it was.
Understood.
How much I enjoyed the give and take with the audience and the whole thing.
Right.
And so speeding up from there, in the 7th grade, I joined the choir in junior high school. And then I was elected or appointed by the head guy to the madrigal choir, which is a cappella. But it was about 20 of us, I guess, the better singers. And we had an a cappella choir, and we actually went around different places, got out of school. I love that part, to go put in these a cappella performances at various places. And we sang, that kind of song, things written in Latin and all that stuff,
Right.
And then I got to high school, and the music teacher there accepted me at first just on the strength of having been in the madrigal choir in junior high. But she handed me a piece of sheet music and told me to learn this song and come back and be able to sing it. And I looked at her like she was from Mars. I'd never seen a piece of sheet music. I mean, I'd never tried to interact with a piece of sheet music. I had no idea what all those squiggles were on that piece of paper.
All right.
I told her that, and she said, "So you can't sight read?" I said, "Well, I can read. I don't know what sight read means." She said, "I don't think you belong in here." So that very same, about 2 or 3 months later, I was in the 10th grade, and I was over at a young lady's house on a Sunday night with some friends of mine. She and her sister and 2 or 3 males, and we were all sitting there, and we were watching the Ed Sullivan Show because we had heard this group called the Beatles were going to be on there. So I believe this was 1964. I think that's right. Or late 63. In any event, we heard them sing "She Loves You." And the easiest way to say this, I formed my first rock and roll band the next week. Now, this is what I want to do. The heck with that school singing. This is what I want to do. So I formed my first band, and I didn't play an instrument. So I was just singing, and we got to be pretty good. We got some gigs, but the one thing we didn't have was back in those days, you called it a piano player, but a keyboard player.
Gotcha.
So it's so funny. The guys in the band said to me once at rehearsal, "We need a keyboard player." And I said, "Yeah, we sure do. We need to go find one." They said, "No, that'd be too many people in the band. You learn to play the keyboard." And I said, "Oh, right. Yeah, I'm just going to learn to, play the piano." So my mother, I told my mother I wanted to take piano lessons. So I go to this, basement of the women's club in downtown Little Rock, where you've got the 50-some-year-old balding pot-bellied man. You get the stereotype, right?
I get it.
That's the piano instructor. And he was nice enough, but again, after my first lesson, he handed me a piece of sheet music and said, "Okay, now I've taught you the Every Good Boy Does Fine and the FACE, and I've told you a little bit about whole notes and half notes and this and that. So I want you to go home, and here's this mimeographed one sheet of paper with this song on it. And I can tell you the name of the song. It was My Wild Irish Rose.
Oh, wow.
So I go home, and I had bought, by the way, a Wurlitzer electric piano.
Okay.
The very famous kind that everyone knows, what Ray Charles played on What Did I Say?
The original. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had bought this piano, and I loved the tone, still do. And I sat down to try to work that out. And after about 10 or 15 minutes of, okay, that's an F note, and you play it for a whole, I said, I knew my father had a 78 RPM record of My Wild Irish Rose.
Mm-hmm.
So I went up in the closet and found it. And by that time, we had a record player that played 33s, 45s, and 78. This was a 78, of course.
Yes.
Well, I put that thing on there, and I found My Wild Irish Rose, and I listened to it about 3 or 4 times. And then I went over to the piano and started picking it out.
Mm-hmm.
And within the space of the next hour, I had figured it out.
Right.
So I could play it. Basically with triad chords with my left hand and single notes with my right hand. But, I could make the changes and I could play it.
Wow.
So I'm very proud of that, right? So
right,
I go for my next lesson, my second music lesson. And the first thing he says, can you play your piece? And I said, oh, yes, sir. So I sat down and played it. And he was frowning. And he looked at me and he said, we have at least 2 serious problems here.
Mm.
I said, I didn't play it good. He said, oh, you played it very well. In fact, that's one of the problems. You played a considerably more sophisticated version than what was on that sheet music I gave you, melody-wise.
Understood.
And I said, okay, is that bad? He said, well, yes and no. He said, and let me tell you another problem we have. He said, do you know what a key is? I said, I've heard people use that word key,
terminology, right?
I don't quite know what that is. He said, well, here's the problem. I know you don't know what a key is because you played the song in a different key than the sheet music. He said, so what did you do? Fess up.
Right.
So I told him, I won't repeat it, but I told him just what I just told you.
Right.
He said, okay. He said, this will be your last lesson with me. He said, I get the feeling, and he kind of did like this. He said, I get the feeling you're in a rock and roll band. And I said, yes, sir. He said, and you probably wanting to learn to play like Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh, my God.
And I said, well, that's one of my goals. He said, well, let me tell you this. He said, you have a great ear, but you have absolutely no desire to learn the standard musical notation system. I said, that would be correct. He said, therefore, this is your last lesson with me because I teach musical notation. I said, okay. He said, however, I like you and you're in luck. So let me tell you for the next hour what I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to explain to you how seriously important chords are in the realm of pop music stated broadly.
Sure.
So I'm going to teach you all about chords. And then that will empower you to use the knowledge I'm giving you tonight to go forward, and your bandmates will help you. And he said, because listen, man, you can pick it up. He said, besides, you're not going to be playing lead all the time. It's not like, you'll be singing and you'll be, blah, blah, blah. So that night he taught me things like, how come there's 3 black keys and then a space and 2 black keys? And I said, no. He said, because if you didn't do it that way, you wouldn't know where you were. If it was just all black separated by white, you would have no idea where you were. And there's stuff like that. He taught me that, if you make A, C sharp, and E with your left hand, you got an A chord. But if you make C sharp, E, and A, you still have an A chord. It's just a different voicing. So, he taught me stuff like that. Flat the third, you got a minor. Add the seventh, and he told me a seventh chord is when you're anticipating going somewhere, and, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Man, I took it all in, and I went and told my bandmates, I'm ready now, man. I'm ready to go. So it took me a while, but, I learned to be a pretty good keyboard player, and I eventually graduated to a Hammond B3, which I have my Hammond B3 sitting directly to my left, and my Tower Leslie amplifier just to the left of that. And so I played, in rock bands through high school. We were pretty well known in Little Rock, and we had a great time, got lots of dates. Girls loved it and all that.
Yeah. Were you writing? Were you a cover band only, or were you starting
absolutely.
to compose?
Yeah, we were. What happened to me was we started out British Invasion.
There you go.
And we learned all that stuff. And I didn't realize one interesting thing is if you started playing in the 50s, then you were 3 chords or 4 chords or 5 chords at the most. 1, 2, or 2 minor, 4 and 5, 6 minor.
Yeah.
That's it, right? We both know you can play 100 million songs from the 50s using nothing but that. And most of the time, just the 1, 4, 5. So all that Beatles stuff had 12 or 14 chords in it. But that's what I started on. Mm-hmm. So I learned the tough part before I learned the easy part.
Understood.
And then when I got to college and I was broke and I was needing to work and music became revenue for me.
Yeah.
So I started playing in bands that were playing honky tonks and rock and roll dives and, where you had chicken wire and,
right.
Crazy people and all that. And then I started learning all the Chuck Berry stuff and, and this was in the mid to late 60s. Mm-hmm. So, I just learned all of that way.
Yeah.
And I wasn't writing at all. I'd never given a thought to writing a song, never given a thought to it because I just didn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, I fell in love in college and cut to the chase. When I graduated, it didn't work. And I was so upset over my love interest having flown the coop that I wrote my first songs about her and about the unrequited love that was going on in my life at the time. So I dibble dabbled with songwriting, back in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. And then, I played in bands in college. I graduated from college. I got a chance to play in a regional touring band. But to tell you the truth, I had just graduated. I had job offers in my field. I was a television reporter. So I had job offers in my field. And this guy was trying to get me to go on the road with this band. And I went over there and looked at their bus. And their bus still had a moniker on the front that said Little Milton. Do you remember him?
I do, yeah.
So we're talking about 1,000 years ago, right?
Right.
This must have been Little Milton's first bus because it burned about 8 quarts of oil a mile, and stunk and I just couldn't do it. I just could not bring myself. So I went to work at a television station and I worked as a television reporter for 4 years and I played a little during that time, but it was just so difficult. Then I decided to go to law school. I didn't go to law school, by the way, to be an entertainment attorney.
No?
I went to
now
law
you're
school.
Still in, where are you in Arkansas still?
I'm in Little Rock. I went to undergraduate school at Arkansas State University, which is in Jonesboro, but then I pretty quickly got television news job back in Little Rock. And so I went, it was my hometown. I went back there, and so forth. But I decided that I didn't want to be as nomadic as you have to be if you're going to be a television reporter and be successful.
Understood.
So after 3 or 4 years in Little Rock, I had run out the string, if you see what I'm saying. I couldn't advance there, you know. Right. So I got offered jobs, easy to say, in Atlanta and Nashville. And on my way, both of which were much bigger markets than Little Rock. So it was a step up, big step up.
Yeah.
Atlanta would have been a huge step up. But on my way back to Little Rock, I said, I'm not going to be. See, the network correspondents, when they would come into town, we'd all go out to the watering hole with them after the newscast.
Right.
And we would get drunk, to be honest, and explain to us that they'd been married 5 times and they'd moved 15 times. And
wow.
And I'm listening to all that. And, that wasn't me. Just wasn't me.
Understood.
So, and the other part about it was, I always liked living in the South, and what I hope you would think of as the best meaning of living in the South.
Absolutely.
And so I said, well, if you're going to give up this career, and I had a master's degree by this time, and if you're going to give this up, what are you going to do? And I said, well, what did you do that you liked? And the answer was, I really enjoyed having covered government, the governor and the legislature and the courts and all that. I said, what common denominator there to be involved in government and politics and so forth? And the answer was most everybody was a lawyer. I said, okay, I'll go to law school. So I went to law school to be involved in government.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out of law school, I became a prosecutor, thinking about all of this fraud that's going on in Minnesota right now with all of that stuff that's in the news.
Yeah.
I prosecuted Medicaid fraud for a number of years in the Attorney General's office. And it got to the point that, and I was doing very little music, it got to the point that it was affecting my body. Some people are meant to be high pressure litigators.
I see.
Some people aren't. And I had a doctor tell me, because I had a streak running down the left side of my face and my left arm was numb about half the time. And he said, you're 31 or 2, whatever it was, and you're going to have a heart, you're in the wrong job.
Wow. I
said, okay. So I told the Attorney General that afternoon that at the end of his term, I'd be leaving. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't do this. So I did. I set up my own shop, and I got lucky, and I got a client who was in the cable television advertising business when local cable TV advertising was in pure infancy.
Wow.
And I represented him for 2 years, going all over the country negotiating. So I found out what I am as a front end guy. I'm a negotiator. I'm a drafter. I'm a deal maker. That's what I am as a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much a litigator, although I've done some over time.
Understood.
So I had gotten back to playing, and I'd started even writing a little bit at that time. But here's what happened to me. A guy in Atlanta that I knew called me up one day, and he said, how you doing in your law practice? And I'd also opened a television production company so I could have some extra money doing commercials and documentaries and things like that.
Wow. So
I had this serious television production and writing and so forth background, and being a lawyer and doing the music thing. So this guy called me up one day and he said, a friend of mine in Nashville is looking for a lawyer. Would you be interested? And I said, well, what's the company? He said, well, it's a brand new company. It's called Country Music Television.
Oh, boy.
I almost fell over. I said, when do I leave? So he got me an interview, and I went over there. And as the gentleman was looking at my resume, he noticed my television news background and my TV production business background. And he said, can you shoot film? I said, do you mean as opposed to video? Because see, at that time, video had just come in a big way to television, and film had gone out because film is expensive. You can't reuse it. It's, all of those things. So television naturally went toward the video and away from the film in the context of news and commercials and all kinds of things. And so I said, yes. I said, I'm old enough that when I was in television news, we still shot film. And because right when I went to law school is when that transition began to occur.
I see.
So then I said, after I started my own production company, I said, we had clients that wanted things shot on film. So I had 16 millimeter film now, not 35 like they use in Hollywood.
Gotcha.
He said, I'm going to hire you as general counsel of the company if you'll also shoot music videos and teach our guys here how to use film, because the record companies, especially the female artists, have begun to refuse to do videos on video because in those days, video made especially a woman's face look harsh as opposed to how film. Think back to the 40s, some film star, and how that they had that soft kind of glowy look. Well, that's what film offered that video didn't offer.
I see.
And so the record companies had begun to insist that MTV and CMTV and so forth use film. So I said, sure. I wish I'd give anything. I had one of those business cards. I was general counsel and director of cinematography. Talk about a strange title.
Right.
So the cool part about that was I moved to Nashville and started in on that job. And I met all of these really cool people in the country music industry, many of whom were songwriters. And one night I went to a Writers in the Round event, and I had written a few songs, and they didn't know I was a songwriter, but somebody asked me, hey, are you a songwriter? Would you like to play something? I said, well, I didn't come here intending to do that, but if somebody will hand me a guitar, I will. Because, by the way, I initially learned keyboards, right? But along the way, I learned to play rhythm guitar. I'm no lead guitar player, but I learned to play rhythm guitar along the way. So I picked up the guitar and I played a song. And I'll never forget the comment that the sort of the moderator of the thing said to me upon my finishing that song. He said, you need to not stop writing. You can be good. He said, that song that you just played was for your stage in songwriting was really good. So I kind of took him at his word and began writing songs more in earnest. And then over the years, I just, I played quite a bit. I performed quite a bit, but I never lost sight of the songwriting. Then I met some people who were also songwriters, one in particular that I've written 60 songs with. And you begin collaborating like that, and you begin experimenting and spreading out the genres a little bit, because somewhere along the way I had more or less switched to country from rock. I remember driving from Little Rock to Dallas one night in the middle of the night in the early 70s, and In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida came on the radio, the rock station I was listening to. Yeah. And I thought, and I listened to it and I thought, you know what? I don't like that. That's kind of, that's sort of leaving me behind a little bit. That's not me. So I took the variable tuner on the radio and just flipped it like that. It went all the way down to the left end, and it landed on 820 AM, which is 50,000 watt clear channel WBAP in Fort Worth, Texas, and for country music. Hell, I promise you, I hadn't heard 3 or 4 country songs in my life.
Wow.
And the first song it landed on, I'll never forget. There's a guy named Johnny Paycheck. He's dead now.
I remember Johnny Paycheck.
His name actually was Donnie Young.
Wow.
But he adopted the name Johnny Paycheck. And the song was, Friend, don't take her, she's all I've got. And I listened to that and had steel guitar in it, and I didn't like that. But I thought, I think I'll listen to this. So for the next several hours, I listened. And I guess by the next day, I was gone from rock and roll.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
It didn't clang so much, because, we've been introduced to pretty much heavy metal stuff by the late 60s. And it just wasn't me. I just like I'm a crooner, I just like the more melodic.
And the more you were getting into songwriting as well, the construction of songwriting in country music is much different than in Agata de Vida, for sure, right?
Yeah, it made country music crafting made sense to me, whereas the rock and roll stuff did not. It was more like improvisation that led somewhere I didn't want to go.
Understood.
So I pretty much became a country singer and a country writer at that point. I have since spread my wings to many other genres in terms of both performing and writing.
Yeah.
So after I moved to Texas to be a law professor in the mid 80s, when I left CMT, I performed and I wrote, and I had, and I would make pilgrimages to Nashville to do the very most difficult thing I've ever tried to do in my life. And that is market a song once I've written it. That's the tough part. And,
Understood.
Everyone who writes songs does understand that. You have to.
Sure.
So then what happened to me, to sort of finish this story, is in 2014, this guy named John Ingram, who is the guy I've written the 60 songs with, introduced me one night to a piece of software called Band in a Box. And we went on the website to download the trial copy. And I remember that night, John and I were writing a song called I Want to Wake Up With You. Didn't I play that for you guys? I think I did.
You did. Yeah, you did.
And the reason I'm mentioning that is because it was pure R&B. And I really was thinking about, man, it would be great to have a B.B. King type one note lead guitar player playing the ride to this, if we could do a demo and so forth. So we wrote the song, and then John says, why don't we try to put that song in this trial version of Band in a Box? And it has a pretty serious learning curve, but I learned enough of it, the two of us, that we got the song in there. And I found a lead guitar part that sounded just like B.B. King.
Wow.
I've been listening to him forever, so my real claim to fame is I was born in the same town as B.B. King.
All right, there you go.
Indianola, Mississippi. Anyway, when I heard what Band in a Box could do with a song we had just written, I said, John, this empowers me. Because look, if you've written as many songs as we had, who has the money to go anywhere and demo all that stuff at a quality level? You just don't. If you're a normal mortal person, you just don't. But I thought, this takes care of the musicians. Now, for those listeners to this podcast who don't know Band in a Box, I suggest you at least check into it.
Mm-hmm.
PG, like Paul Graham, pgmusic.com. These folks are in Victoria, Canada. And this software is unbelievable if you learn to operate it right. And I did. I've been told I'm among the very best at using Band in a Box.
I'm sure.
At getting the most out of it.
Certainly.
So I began to put songs in Band in a Box, but that was only part of the solution, because what it doesn't do, well, it does. My belief is people ought to do what they're really good at, and they ought to not do what they're not so good at, especially when it comes to music production.
Truth.
I'm not a mixer. I'm not a recording engineer. I'm not those things. So I thought to myself, you know, I need to find somebody in Nashville that I can cut kind of a bulk deal with, a guy with a studio in his home.
Right.
And that's what I did. So what I would do is I would convert the Band in a Box files over to individual wave tracks. I would take those tracks, put them in Dropbox or WeTransfer or one of those, and send them to my guy Larry in Nashville. And by the way, Larry is a gold record winning guy. I mean, he's the most talented musician I've ever met in my life. I'll tell you that.
Wow.
And so the first time I sent him over there and then went over there, he said, okay, let's load up one of these in my DAW and you go sing. So I went out in the studio. He loaded it in his DAW. He hit play and record. I sang. I got about halfway through the second verse and he shut it off. He said, tell me again where you got these tracks. Who played these tracks? And I said, well, Larry, they all came. I said, I brought it with me. I have the software. You want to see it? He said, yeah, I do. So we were talking about the software. He said, well, let me tell you one reason I asked. He said, because I've lived here my entire life. I grew up in Nashville. I know every player over here. He said, and the fiddle in that song you're singing out there? He said, I know the fiddle player. Yeah, it has to be her. She was in here recording last week.
Wow.
He said, I can tell you her name. He said, do you know who the names of these people are? I said, well, I can look it up. And so I did. And I said, yeah, you may tell you her name. He said, no, I'm going to tell you. And he mentioned her name. And I said, that's correct. And then we went through the list. He said, and who's playing lead guitar is so-and-so, and who's playing steel guitar is so-and-so. And so that's when he knew that Band in a Box provides you access to these people.
Interesting. So why don't we talk about that a little bit, because I think that that's something the listeners and those who are doing this podcast needs to know, that it's not just you're putting together strands or stems of people who are actually playing the parts. Is that what's happening?
It isn't loops. You know, I did Sony Acid Pro for a long time.
Sure.
I got good at it.
The loops, yeah, understood.
But it is what it is, and it isn't what it isn't.
Right.
So here's how Band in a Box works. You call up the user interface, and the first thing you see is what Band in a Box calls a chord sheet. What I mean by that is it's laid out in measures, 4 measures to a line. And what you do is you go up to the very first measure and you type in a chord, C. Then I'm going to make this easy. You go to the next measure and you type in A minor. You go to the next measure and you type in F. And you go to the next measure and you type in G. You go to the 5th measure and type in C. So you and I know that's a 1-6 minor 4-5 introduction, and you're going to start singing on the 5th bar. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So now that's fine. You got a chord sheet and a bunch of chords. But where does the music come from? And the answer is 2 places. 1, Band in a Box has inherent with the program thousands, literally thousands of what it calls styles in every genre you can think of. So if it's country, you could go over to the country styles and you could say mid-tempo, you know, whatever. And it would give you a bunch of styles to choose from. And by style, what I mean is it's in that genre, of course.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to give you drums and bass on all of them, because we all know how fundamental that is.
Of course.
And then they're going to give you a lead guitar and maybe an electric piano or a B3, maybe a couple of acoustic guitars. And those aren't tied necessarily to any chord structure. So let's just say you put, let's just say you're wanting to put Stand By Me in the chord sheet, because that's mostly 1/6 minor 4/5, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you put a whole string of 1/6 minor 4/5s in those measures, and you get the beats per minute like you want it, you get the key like you want it, and then you just move that whole style, bass, drums, lead guitar, acoustic guitar, piano, whatever it is, you move that over there, and it's a mixer. It looks kind of like a DAW, and there they are. You see them right there, and you just hit play, man. Just hit play,
And that's it.
and you've given it everything it needs to do that. You've given it the key, the number of beats per minute. You've given it the chord structure throughout the whole song, no matter how many different chords you have or how complicated there are or what voicing of the chord it is. It'll handle all of that. And then you hit play and it'll just play it. Now,
So these are pre-recorded. I know they're not loops.
Let me tell you this part. This is what's so fascinating. And Larry and I learned this because he knew the people on my recording that were personal friends of his forever. So He called one of them up, steel player. He called him up and he said, "Steve, I just heard you on this thing called Band in a Box." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, you did?" He says, "What the hell how does that work?" He said, "Okay, these guys from Victoria, Canada called me and they said, we'll pay your expenses up here. We want you here for a week. We got a studio in a trailer. We want you to go in the trailer. We're going to give you a metronome type apparatus so you'll stay on beat because you're going to be playing yourself."
Gotcha.
He said, "And what we want you to do is play everything you know. Take a week to play everything you know."
Amazing.
So they would tell him, he'd play something, and they'd say, "Okay, you played that in C, now play that in D." Because they didn't want digital artifacts to be a problem in this program. So when you change keys in Band in a Box, you don't get the same track. You get the one that was recorded in D, not the one that was recorded in C where you had started.
Understood.
And the long and short of it is you play your heart out, every tempo, everything for a week, and they give you a couple grand they negotiate, depending on your stature.
Yeah.
They give you some pretty good money, and it's work made for hire, and off you go, and they get to use it however they want to. Okay, now let me tell you, step back just a second and tell you this part. When we did that very first song that night, and I was so enamored of Band in a Box that I knew I was buying it the next day. And I did. It cost and back in those days, it was 2014. I think I paid $800 for what they call the audio file version. I don't do anything unless I have the money to do the best.
The premium.
Doing it any other way doesn't really work.
Understood.
So I was trying nowadays I get an external hard drive with the program in it every year. Back in those days, you had to download it. So I was having a little download problem. So I called the customer service guy in Victoria, Canada to ask him my question. And while he was answering my question about my download problem, I said, "I got another question for you." He said, "Answer is, I don't know." I said, "I hadn't asked you the question yet." He said, "Yeah, but I know what it is." I said, "Well, okay, what?" He said, "How the hell does this work? This makes no sense." I said, "Yes, sir, that's my question." He said, "And the answer is, I don't know." He said, "I'm a musician." He said, "All I can tell you is they got 4 or 5 guys in a room and they put food under the door every once in a while. They don't ever let them out." He said, "And these guys," he said, "it's all algorithmic, right?" He said, "They have created algorithms that make the guy playing a C chord and change to an A minor chord between 1 and 2 happens seamlessly. You know, see, you could sort of get into your head. He could play C here, but there'd be a little interruption before he moved to the A minor.
Of course.
C, A minor, F.
Right. Very robotic, very stiff.
Nothing stiff about this. It's as fluid and seamless as anything you could imagine.
Well, I've heard it. I mean, I've heard your stuff on it.
So. Yeah, absolutely. And so once I understood that, and I was able to pick a style, go over to the chord sheet, load my chords to the song I had written in there. Then what I would do, I got a little digital MP3 recorder. And when I would get through with the band in the box thing, that's just the tracks, right? So, and you can add, by the way, it's digital. You can add as many, and Band in Box has many thousands of individual tracks. So one of the very most well-known studio guitar players in Nashville is a guy named Brent Mason. He's won the award for best lead guitar studio picker of the year, like 20 years in a row. So I wanted to use him, of course. So my point is you can go into Band in the Box and actually look him up, and it will give you particular styles. I mean, if you're looking for him playing rockabilly, okay, there's one in there for that. If you're looking for him playing a bluesy thing, okay, there's that. R&B, there's that, you know, all of that. So I went in there and picked out Brent Mason to do the B.B. King part on that very first song we were putting in Band in the Box. And I was blown away, you know, just completely. He played the single note style of B.B. He did, you know, everything, you know. So in Band in the Box, you not only can pick that style of the number of instruments, but once you have those loaded over there in what I'm going to call the Band in the Box DAW,
okay,
then you can pick individual pickers and instruments by name, by whatever. And as long as it matches what you've already got in there and I mean, they'll give you a range on beats per minute, for instance. They'll say, if your song is 100 beats per minute, this range right here is 70 to 130. So this one would work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you get your tracks. And one, I guess you could say this is a demerit. But unlike in a studio where you might have 12 mics, 12 channels on the drums, in Band in the Box you got 2. What they've done with all the drummers is they've mixed that down to stereo because it would just take up too much room.
Oh, sure.
Do it any other way. So you're a bit limited, but Larry and I have learned to work around that. And the drums are great, and they got a zillion different drums, you know. So anyway, you get through, you get your style, you get your extra players, you get your chord sheet done, you get it all in there, and you play the whole thing, and you're singing along with it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not recording your voice.
That's where the MP3 player comes in?
Yeah,
MP3
there is
recorder?
a way to record your voice more professionally, but what did I just tell you a few minutes ago? That ain't me. I can't sing and be a recording engineer at the same time. I just do it. So I got this little MP3 player, and all I do is I just hit play and record on it, and it's got an internal microphone. So it just picks up the Band in the Box tracks off the speaker of the computer, and it picks up my voice because I'm sitting there singing, and I end up with what you and I would call a scratch recording. You know, you can hear it. It's just not a good recording of their vocals. It's not a good recording of the music because it's coming off a speaker. I mean, all of that, but it's fine for what it is. And I do it for 2 reasons. One is for melody preservation. So I don't, because until that point, I haven't recorded the melody anywhere. So I don't want to forget the melody by coming back the next day and saying, oh, what was that cool melody I had? You know, so I preserve it on a little MP3. Okay. Then what I do is I render all of the musical tracks to individual WAV files. Put the individual WAV files in Dropbox, send them to Larry. By the time I get there with maybe a dozen songs to do, Larry has all of it downloaded and fixed up in his DAW like he wants it.
Yeah.
All I have to do when I walk in the door, after we talk a few minutes, he says, "What do you want to start with?" And I always say, "I don't care." And he says, "Okay, well, we'll start with, and just whatever's first, you know." And I go out in the studio, I sing it 3 times, then we immediately come back in and what we call comp the vocal.
Right.
Meaning we listen to first line, first phrase of each 3 versions, pick the best one, end up with finished vocal. Then I take over the board. He is an incredibly good harmony singer. He was hired several months ago to sing harmony on a Bob Dylan brand new song with Dylan in the studio that was going in a movie. So with all the backup singers there are in Nashville, that's a signal honor to be.
Definitely.
You know, absolutely. So that just tells you how good he is. So I go run the board and he sings harmony. Man, I asked him to do the Jordanaires one time. He did all 4 parts. I mean, he just can. So we'll get the harmonies down and then we will pitch correct. I don't need much, but I'm like anybody else. I don't sing perfectly. So, we pitch correct a little bit. He requires no pitch correction himself. He's just like got perfect pitch. Yeah. And the next thing is we mix and edit. You know, he also is a very good editor. I mean, if we want to move something, like if I don't like the way one chorus happened, we can fly one from somewhere else down there and,
sure,
do all of that. So, and then once we get through mixing, then he runs it through a mastering program. And I've got a finished, you can call it what you want to. I call it a demo / master because there's no reason you couldn't use it as a master.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't exactly my intention, at least when I started doing this. I've now have more than 2 million streams using the results of this process. But
certainly
that wasn't my original intention.
That's interesting.
So I ended up creating a website, solidsterlingmusic.com, and I have now more than 600 songs on there. Wow. And with 2 or 3 exceptions, all of the songs on there were produced in exactly. First, I would write them, then I would put them in Band in a Box, do all the things you have to do, send them over to Nashville, go over to Nashville, sing them, do all the things I just talked to you about, and end up with a recording that would have cost $1,500, $2,000 in a studio. And I can't tell you what it is, but I made a fabulous bulk deal with Larry. I'm his best customer. He loves me. And what he knows is he had, we slowed down a little bit, but for 10 solid years, I was going over there paying him money every month. So it was great for both of us. So
well, you're eliciting more questions out of me, especially with that story of the Band in the Box. That's interesting to me because when we met on Barry's master call, it was concerning AI, and so what you've explained through Band in the Box in the decades that you've been using it is like a precursor to the reason. I won't say it was the reason you were on the call, but what you were explaining when the fear, anger, and complaints of AI became prevalent in the conversation. You had a degree of balance that I thought was very thought-provoking. Because as you know, in our community, there are a couple writers who are using Suno. And so you had expressed that you had used it. So between Band in the Box and having all of that material at your disposal and being able to make great recordings in the method that you've just explained, we have to do two things. First, we have to understand the balance that you brought to the fore with how Suno is being used. And secondly, then the logistics and the legalities of using it. And I think you're the most balanced voice, again, that I've heard in the last 3 months about the outcry that's going on. So how do you segue between the two?
It was so fascinating. I guess it would be fair to say that I rely on my co-writing friend John Ingram to tell me about the latest software.
I see.
You'd think I'd be the one keeping up with it. And of course, look, I think I said the other day, as a law professor, I taught entertainment law for 15 years at a major law school. So obviously, I was thinking about all this stuff from long, long ago, because those students, man, they're, a generation or two younger than me, and they know all this stuff upside down and backwards. They challenged me. I had to be, top of my game to talk to them.
Certainly.
So in 2005, I wrote my first paper and gave a speech to an international gathering of intellectual property lawyers on the subject of generative AI, though none of us had heard that phrase at the time. 2005, I hadn't heard the words AI. We just knew that machine production was coming, and that somebody was calling it artificial intelligence, and that artificial intelligence had many, many legs and all of that. I didn't know anything about that in 2005, and don't apologize for that. Over time, of course, we started knowing what it was to be called and all of that. So the only thing I knew about AI was the generative part. That is, you call up an AI program, whether it's Chat GPT and you're writing a term paper, or whether it's Suno and you're writing a song. If you call up Chat GPT and say, I need to write a song about farmers' bankruptcies in the Civil War in the South, and that's all you say to it, and you go boop, and the next thing you know, and you tell it how long you want it to be, and now you got a term paper that you go turn in and make your A, and you might not have read the thing,
Right.
Well, that is generative AI at its most unseemly. And that's all I knew of that it would do with respect to music. I didn't know the nuances. So I was dead set. Matter of fact, you can go on my website, Solid Sterling Music, and on the very home page, I put a sentence on there that says, none of the music on this website was generated by AI in the context of melodies or lyrics.
Right.
And that's absolutely true. So about 6 weeks ago, my friend John gave me a call. I now live in Florida and John is still in Texas, but we're still very good friends. We talk all the time. And John called and he said, hey, I've heard about this new thing I want to tell you about. I said, okay. He said, it's called Suno, and I'd never even heard of Suno. And he said, and it's this AI thing. I said, John, I'm not going to do AI. I said, look, you and I are great songwriters. What the hell do we need that for? And he said, well, I get what you mean, but he says, I think you ought to do yourself the favor of just going on there and looking around and just kind of see what it does. He said, you might find something that you could use to enhance what we do. And I thought, I didn't get it, but okay. So I'm going to cut to the chase. I go on there, and it didn't take me very long to see that if you want to use it purely from a generative AI perspective, you can. But there's two other ways you can use it. One, you can ask it to use your exact lyrics, but to make a derivative of your melody. That is, don't sing the exact melody, kind of do with it as you would. Don't get too far away, but kind of do with it as you would. And let's say you wrote the song country. Let's say you want to make a rock song out of it. Just write the word rock in there where it says style. And, and so naturally that probably would change the melody a little bit. Even though you got the same chord structure, you're still switching genres.
Sure.
So I saw that it would do that. So I call that derivative AI. Some people call it assisted AI. I don't like that word. I like derivative. And the reason I like derivative is because that's a legal term. The Copyright Act very specifically states that if I write the melody and somebody else sings it and they sing it a little different than I wrote it, I still own that. Mm-hmm. Because it's nothing more than a derivative of what I created. So it's still my expression, even though it didn't literally fly out of my mouth. It came out of saying, hey, hire a demo singer. Listen, if I gave you a song of mine to sing, you're not going to sing my exact notes. Exactly. You're not going to for 1,000 reasons. So there is derivative AI. Then I figured out, and this took me a few days, but I figured out that in Suno, it is incredibly easy. Suno calls it cover. When you download the song, it says copy. You hit copy, and then it goes to a place where it says cover and 2 other choices. You hit cover and then continue, and it downloads the song and puts it in the position where as though it was a popular song and you're just meaning to cover it. That's what they mean by cover. The same way we would use the word cover to say that's a cover band, right?
Right.
And what that means is they're going to take the exact lyrics and the exact melody, stay as close to it as they absolutely can. You put in the other parameters, hit create. And the first time I did that, guess what? With one of my band in a box creations. I uploaded that to Suno, told it I wanted it to cover it, use the exact lyrics I was singing, use the exact melody I was singing, and do 2 things different: a different singer and different musicianship. Maybe slightly different instruments, maybe upgraded production style. I was telling Marilyn just this morning how different R&B is from the 60s when I was singing it to what it is today. That's just evolutionary. It's just the natural evolution of music. I told her this. I said, I'm very comfortable with 60s R&B. I'm very comfortable with traditional blues. I write great traditional blues songs, but if you ask me to write a contemporary blues song, I'd be struggling. So what Suno does is it will take it'll change the singer, and it will change the production values. That's the best phrase I know to use to describe it.
Sure.
You put in various parameters and you hit create, and it creates 2 versions each time you do that. And then you just, when it's finished, and it does it in real time, so you have to sit there a few minutes, you hit play. And I want to tell you, the first time I hit play, when I had put that tightness, that conservative idea of creation in there, and I listened to it, I was just as blown away, if not more, than I was the night in 2014 when I listened to that first demo John and I created with Band in a Box. I was at least that blown away by it. And so I will tell you now that as of today, I have moved, that's the word I'm using, more than 200 of my songs from the Band in a Box demo /master over to Suno. seamlessly, flawlessly. Suno can be hard to work with. Listen, sometimes you may have to hit create 4 or 5 times and have 8 or 10 versions before you get one.
I see.
I was doing a duet where the female vocal in the song only sings the bridge. So I had to took me quite a while to figure out how to make Suno have me sing or its male singer sing everything except the bridge and have a female singer sing that. And it took me about 10 or 12 tries. I'm going to have to buy a mouth guard because I'm clenching my teeth so hard from wanting that to work. I'll do one of those creates and I hit play and I'm let go. Please don't screw up, please, And sometimes it gives you a beautiful thing on the first try. Sometimes I think a lot of that is the fact that there's a serious learning curve with Suno, and I'm not there yet. I'm probably halfway to first base.
Understood. Well,
Fabulous things.
and I've heard, you were able to A and B a project that you did or a song that you did in Band in the Box, and then the revision, if I can call it that, with the Suno version. Now,
Right.
I must say, and this is where the questions come into play because, of course, there are legalities, and we know that there was just a purchase. I think somebody purchased somebody, whether it was Warner Brothers purchasing Suno or something like that, or
Well,
Suno purchasing.
they settled their lawsuit.
They're settled. Yeah, my mistake
So
with
they
regard to
now
that.
are not at odds with each other. They've now worked it out. And
Yeah.
Suno now has the right to do what it was already doing that it didn't have the right to do. And by that, I mean scraping their database for use in their database. That doesn't come anywhere near resolving all the issues. But if I can just say one thing before you ask
Sure.
me whatever you want to ask, that is,
Sure.
I've been a lawyer 50 years. And for 30 of those years, I've been a mediator and an arbitrator. I've mediated 1,000 lawsuits. And here's what I know. If there's enough money involved, you're going to settle the case because business people want to be in business, not in a room arguing about this, that, and the other.
Makes sense.
So because there's so much money to go around here, I was not the least bit surprised that Warner Brothers was able to make a deal with Suno. Now, we don't know the details of the deal. We just know that Suno is paying Warner Brothers on some basis.
Yeah.
We know that for sure. We don't know a lot else. I'm sure and the reason they don't release the details of the settlement is because there's so many other lawsuits going on that how that one worked out might impact how the other
Influence, right?
So they're going to be close to the vest on that, at least for the time being.
Understood. No, well, it's interesting because I was going to ask about, because this has been settled, and my fault in thinking it was a purchase. What are there still legal ramifications or legal challenges?
Many.
Could you share a couple
Sure.
of those with it? Because then I'm going to go off that, and then I'm going to ask some of the questions or present some of the concerns when we were on the Berry call, because that was from sync licensing, and it's just a myriad of things that need to be worked out. But can you go into some of the core things?
Yeah, this is at its very core. You and I, as songwriters, and all the members of your audience who are songwriters know, whether they've thought about this or not, they know that it all begins with the songwriter. Then the song, if successful, starts to go around this big 360-degree circle. And when you get back down to the very end of that circle, the songwriter gets paid. So as my mentor, deceased now, but a retired federal judge, used to tell me, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. So when you start on that path, a a song of yours getting into what I call a royalty earning position, whatever that may mean.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many places along the way that something can interrupt the process and mean that you end up not getting paid at all, maybe because of fraud or other reasons, or what you get paid is a pittance of what you should have been paid.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm in a situation right now where a music publisher owes me several $1,000s, and he's just daring me to sue him for it. Simple as that. Because he doesn't think I will. And he's right, I won't. Because it's not enough money, and the lawsuit would be in state court about 10 states away from where I am. And therefore, and he knows that, in my opinion. He's just taking advantage of that. Okay, I'll do the best I can. So you've got the songwriter, you have the publisher, you have the record company, you have the producer of the recording, you have the players on the recording, you have all of these stops along the way. And to say that there's many a slip between the cup and the lip is an understatement. Okay, so let's relate that to Suno. Let's relate that to AI music. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, in order to create the database from which we are getting all this wonderfulness, you had to have access to not one, but a whole host of databases that have music on them, that is popular music, that is in every conceivable genre, and that is new. I mean, maybe you want a database of 50s music. I don't know. And I'm not saying that won't happen at some point. So you can go in there and create a 50 song that, 70 years later. But so the people that got in the AI business had to get access some way, somehow, to what I just said. I can't even see, when I was a prosecutor, part of my problem with being a prosecutor was I don't think like criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a hard time understanding how they think and what their processes would be to engage in the skullduggery that they intend to engage in. So if you're the AI company, I can't even imagine what your thought process was as to how you're going to get that music. I still don't know. I don't know. I'm not even sure I want to know. But the point is they had to get it somewhere.
Correct.
Now, when you are going to use somebody else's property, it's generally a good idea to ask them their permission and to have some kind of quid pro quo, some kind of compensation. The AI companies, to my knowledge, did not do that at all. They simply found the databases. They simply copied the databases. They put that in their mainframe computer. I'll just call it that because it has to be a big one.
Sure.
And then subjected all of that music to the algorithms that allow you to create this generative or derivative or what? Creations. Okay. Well, if you were Warner Brothers and you had, I wouldn't even know how to hazard a guess of how many master sound recordings
Right.
Warner Brothers owns. I wouldn't even know how to hazard a guess. I can tell you that their music publishing company owns hundreds of thousands of copyrights.
Absolute.
I'm more familiar with that. So would you feel aggrieved if you were Warner Brothers that somebody had come along and appropriated all of this music for its own purposes, whatever they are, without paying you a dime. Well, of course, you wouldn't like that. So the first lawsuits that came along against the AI companies, and by the way, let me just tell you as a lawyer, it isn't that the AI companies didn't anticipate being sued. It isn't that they didn't understand they would end up settling or paying somehow, losing a lawsuit, whatever. So they argued fair use. Now, I won't go into a law school explanation of fair use, but suffice it to say, if you can comply with the fair use ideas contained in the Copyright Act and contained in all of the court decisions on the subject of fair use over 50 years, then you can use somebody's copyright without compensating them at all. So the question, of course, was the AI company's use of somebody else's copyright a fair use under the Copyright Act? It stretches credulity very thin to say that there's any aspect of it that's a fair use. But that's what they defended themselves on, just to get the lawsuit going along where they could then sit down and talk with these people. That's what they have done. So that record company has settled with them. Whether Suno finds it as easy to settle with other record companies, I mean, look, this is going to be, I wouldn't even hazard to guess how many lawyers Suno has working on this. And they are from high-powered New York law firms.
Without fail.
And guess what? The other big record labels have the same group of lawyers. And I've mediated cases where I've got this high-powered group on one side and another high-powered group on the other side. And I want to tell you, that's not a lot of fun. For one thing, these guys are so well-funded that they don't care if they settle it at all that day or not. In other words, lawsuits so much of the time are not about the law, but about the processes that are involved and how you can make somebody's life so miserable that they'll agree to something they otherwise wouldn't agree to.
I understand.
So those lawsuits have just begun. But remember what I said earlier. My opinion is Suno is not going to be bankrupted. There's too much money involved here. So, in my opinion, they'll struggle along and get the lawsuits with the record labels settled. Now, that's just the record labels. This is more toward the question you asked. Who else might be aggrieved to the point that they have a legitimate lawsuit against Suno themselves? Well, how about the artists? If the question is, do I ever listen to a Suno creation and hear an artist that I've been listening to for decades singing? And the answer is sort of, because they're not going to let it come out where it's Garth Brooks singing, right? But you might hear vestiges of that, maybe combined with Alan Jackson singing. I mean, you see what I'm saying? So the question becomes, do those artists have an interest in not having their voice misappropriated for the private use of another party? That isn't even necessarily copyright infringement. But we have all kinds of laws in the United States about a person's inability to misappropriate another person's name, likeness, or identity. Just like the NIL phrase you hear in college football today.
Right.
That stands for name, ID, and likeness. And that's what all those players are getting all that money for, allowing advertisers and the school and other people the right to use their NIL. So whereas in my day, those players didn't get a nickel, Now they're getting millions.
That's right.
And that's another story altogether. It's ruining college football, in my opinion, but that's just
Certainly.
okay. So that's the artists. What about the players who played in the recording studio? Here's the deal. You can say, well, wait a minute. All that stuff, that was a work made for hire. They don't, when they played and made union session money, let's say, they signed a document. I've had many of them sign this document when I'm producing demos in a recording studio. I know what the document says. It says that performance is a work made for hire, and I own that. Okay. So if I own it, and they, more importantly, don't own it, then by what logic would the studio musicians have a beef with what? And my opinion is this was an uncontemplated technology that has changed the dynamic. So whereas under that contract, they might not have any rights, but they might have some rights under a tort theory that isn't contractual.
Yeah.
It's somebody doing something to somebody they ought not to do, like hitting them with their car, just to give you a simple analogy.
Sure.
That's a tort. A civil wrong perpetrated by one party against another party. That's the broadest definition of what a tort is. So can I see some enterprising lawyers representing, I don't know, the Nashville Musicians Union?
Yeah.
So that you could have a collective, rather than individual players.
Or there's in my, not because I'm not an attorney, so which is why you're sitting on the other side of the screen. Let's just say, I don't know if you know the musician. He's a star in his own right, but he started out as a triple scale musician, Marcus Miller. You've heard of him, bass player, Marcus Miller.
Name, but yeah.
Incredible because, again, he became a solo artist in his own right, started playing bass with, all kinds of New York hit slayers, right? From Bob James, Luther Vandross, on and on. The thing that Marcus Miller did, which is an interesting reason I'm bringing him up, is because he created his own sound. So it doesn't matter what CD you bought in the 80s and the 90s, you knew that was Marcus Miller playing before you went to the liner notes. The equalization, all of that. And so, when you listen to something that is produced with artificial intelligence and they've scraped all of this and you say, well, I really want that Marcus Miller sound.
Exactly.
Although he didn't own any of that, he signed the work for hire, but they took something that was uniquely his.
Here's the question. Will a modern day court say that, number one, that is misappropriatable, and number two, was misappropriated? And if the courts come along and say that, then he now has a cause of action for them. There's so many different ways to look at it.
Yeah.
But it's conceivable to me that he, as an example of people like him, would have a valid cause of action. I mean, look, Suno has opened up. They just took a 2x4 and whacked a hornet's nest. That's what they did.
Yeah.
They broke that hornet's nest wide open.
Absolutely. Here's another question for you then.
Right.
How do you feel, knowing that the hornet's nest has been whacked, and knowing what they were able to do with your song, the one that you presented, the A version, the B version,
Right.
How do you feel as a composer? I mean, do you still feel after B, this is what they were able to do? And yes, I could not do this. This is what was in my heart to do, but they did it. Yeah, that makes me feel good that my idea was expressed. But how do you feel as the composer, that guy sitting down where you plunked out the keys and took it to your piano teacher, and you felt like, hey, here's something that I accomplished that my piano teacher knew it wasn't in the right key, you know. But when I started writing songs, I'm talking about Don Tomlinson. When Don Tomlinson started writing songs, and I had that sense of achievement because it
Right.
came out of me, do you still feel the same way after now using Suno?
I do. I do. This is more of a moral proposition than it is a legal proposition, but that's extremely important to me. And I know it is to you, and it should be to everyone. So we should feel comfortable on all these levels if we're going to go forward. So, on the moral level, specifically with respect to what I'm doing, uh, because I know I wrote all the lyrics and all the melody, and that I'm simply using a tool to put myself in a better position than I could be in before in this dog eat dog, highly competitive music marketing world. Now, that said, do I completely lack sympathy for the people whose instrumentation and whose voices, even though it might just be a little piece of something here and there and so forth, and it might be 20 voices making up that. And by the way, you'll never figure that out. You know, there's no way to figure that out. Um, am I comfortable with that? And the answer is yes, for two reasons. One, um, the part I'm using that belong to them is what in the law is called de minimis. In other words, each aggrieved person, the artist or the guitar player or the bass player or whoever it is, their contribution through Suno to my end result Suno recording is de minimis. The law recognizes and morality recognizes that not every wrong has a remedy, because the wrong may be so infinitesimally small that there's no way to ever identify it or figure out how to compensate it. And I understand the de minimis idea. If de minimis was not a centuries old legal precept, then the world would just be one gigantic lawsuit because everybody would be suing everybody every day for everything. So you have to draw a line in there somewhere. You know, your neighbor comes out on the driveway and calls you a bad name. Were you injured? Well, yeah, I don't know. Were you? You know, can you file a lawsuit about that? Well, in the non de minimis world, you could. So you have to, in my mind, at some point you have to
Sure.
buy the idea that this is a complaint by those people against me specifically for my Suno end result. That's de minimis. Now, having said that, I'm not saying it's de minimis as against Suno. I had a co-writer here that I've just met, great guy, asked me the other day if he thought there was any possibility that as individual songwriters, we could be sued for basically what you're just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
By somebody that says, I believe that 2.5 notes of that was my bass playing, you know?
Yeah, right.
And what I told him was, you know, I guess everything is theoretically possible, but I find that to be silly.
Mm-hmm.
It's de minimis. It's a million other things that would cause that not to happen. Besides, who wants to be suing a bunch of broke songwriters? Who you want to be suing is the people with the money.
Sure.
And the people with the
Sure.
money is Suno, and God knows what kind of insurance they have. I mean, that's who you want to be suing. So I don't have a problem at all with what I'm doing because I contributed the melody, I contributed the lyrics. I'm asking a tool to do something for me. And if part of that tool, if the producers of part of that feel aggrieved, they should feel aggrieved by the people that got their expression in the first place and put it in their mainframe and allowed me to use it, not me. Does that make sense?
That makes great sense. I just needed to know because that was something that, as we were talking as the entre musician community, that question did not come up. So I'm
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at the replay and I'm preparing for this podcast, and I'm going, well, I wonder how Don feels. I mean, because we all knew, oh, this was very good, and this was something that you wanted, but then inside the spirit of who you are, I needed to
Absolutely.
ask that question. Another question, and I think it would be relevant because, of course, we keep bringing Barry's name up with the result of that conversation, because he's primarily dealing with sync licensing. You had an interesting perspective on what you think music companies who are specializing in sync are going to require, because there are a significant amount of them who are saying no AI whatsoever. And I, I want everyone to hear your perspective that you shared there on that call.
First, let me say I like Barry very much.
Oh, we're
I like musicsupervisor.com.
absolutely.
I have hundreds of songs on that database. I haven't had any success with it, but it's interesting as to why I think that's the case. And in a few minutes, I'd like to tell you that.
Sure.
But let me share with you first. I don't guess you could call it shock, but my surprise at Barry's posture. And here's why. I have to introduce another company in order to compare the two so that this makes sense. For your audience that is not aware of this, they should, if they're interested in sync, they should become aware of a company called BroadJam, BroadJam.com. So BroadJam does the same thing that Music Supervisor does, but they have different procedures. But it's the same thing. You're pitching your songs to sync opportunities in either case. Okay. So you go on BroadJam and you look up the opportunities. They list them all, and I hadn't counted them, but I'd guess there's 60 or 80 or maybe even 100. I don't know how many are on there on any given day, but it's a whole lot. So you go to the very first one and you click on it and you go down through the bullet points. And I go very quickly. When I click on one, I want to see two things first: AI accepted, yes or no, and exclusive or non-exclusive. So for your audience that doesn't know what that means, let me just very quickly say exclusive means they get your copyright.
Right.
Bad.
Right.
Non-exclusive means they don't get your copyright, and
Correct.
you live to be able to pitch that song to whoever else you want to. If it's exclusive, you've lost any rights. You've lost your ability to do anything with your own music. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So when I go down through the BroadJam site and take a proportion, a percentage of the ones that accept AI and the ones that do not accept AI, I haven't actually done the math. Off the top of my head, I'm going to tell you, I think it's at least 90% of those opportunities do accept AI. Barry, on the other hand, says none of his opportunity providers want anything to do with AI. And I want to tell you, I have a hard time with that. Too much disparity between the two groups of opportunity providers. Hard to believe that 90% of them over here say, yeah, send your AI in. And let me tell you that the reason I'm okay with all this AI business like I'm doing it is because if you get a sync opportunity and it's in a movie or a TV show, you're not promoting it as a song done by an artist.
That's true.
It's just a song in a movie.
Yeah. Or background music.
Or it's background, or it's whatever. I just don't, the great hue and cry about, the digital chart in Nashville the other day, some AI person ended up #1, and I get all that. And I think that's horrible. Because that's purely generative AI. I think all that's horrible.
Yeah.
But in the context of sync, that's just not how it works. Now, the context of using, say, that song of mine that you have heard as a demo, what's the problem with that? Because that recording is never going to be used for anything except playing to the pickers who are going to re-record it. So what's the problem?
Yeah, makes sense.
Now,
absolutely.
I think Barry, with all respect to him, and I have a great deal of respect for him, I think he is wrong, and I think his opportunity providers are wrong in refusing to accept AI. Now, look, you can put all kinds of limitations on the AI if you want. You can say no generative AI. You can say, what you can say to me, you can say, prove to me you had a demo of this song before Suno ever existed. And I say, solidsterlingmusic.com. There's 600 songs on there. They're all right there. Go listen all you want to, and you will hear what I did when I moved the song from there. And you have heard that. So you know that it's my melody and my lyrics. But if any sync opportunity company came to me and said, we really like this song, but we're a little dubious of this AI involvement, and can you explain that? I would say, yes, I can. I wouldn't be able to if I were using it generatively.
Certainly.
But I'm not. And I want to tell you something else. I haven't even tested that because I want to be able to testify under oath that I have never asked an AI program to do one single thing for me that didn't involve my melody and my lyrics. So you're not going to be able to get me to even test that out. I'm just not going to do it.
I understand that.
So to me, you got two worlds. One, you got the demo world. I got no problem with that. And my songwriting friends in Nashville tell me that Suno is taking over Nashville. Now look, do I have a problem with all the studios that are going to go out of business? With all the pickers that are going to have to go back on the road because they can't play in studios anymore because there's no production going on in studios?
Sure.
Look, I can tell you from years and years of living in Nashville that the recording studio business is about 90% demos. That's just the way it is. So if demos are now being done in Suno, all you got to do is write the song, record your voice, upload your voice singing the melody to Suno, paste the lyrics in there and hit create. Tell it what genre you want and so forth. That's a demo. That's a demo. It's the exact same thing you're doing if you're going in a recording studio and having the pickers do that. You play. I mean, how many times have I sat in a recording studio and played a guitar vocal to the pickers who then went out and recorded the song? It's the same thing.
Yeah, I understand that.
So I lament the economics of what it's going to do. But let me tell you something about that. The reason I don't feel bad about that is because there's nothing I can do to stop it. Anybody that thinks AI is going away, it is not.
Yeah.
It is simply not. So we're going to have to learn to deal with it. And I'm doing my best from a legal perspective and a moral perspective to not offend myself by what I do with Suno. How it impacts other people, man, you know, when the fax machine came along, the guys that delivered telegrams went out of business.
It's true.
You know, to me, it's c'est la vie. You know, life goes on.
It's amazing because as a drummer, and I've had several conversations. I mean, I'm back in the days where I'm playing drums and the drum machine comes along, and different drummers, are we going to be displaced by? We're not going to be called in anymore. I went out and bought a drum machine and learned how to program it. You know what I mean?
Of course.
That's what you do. You have to adapt. And I must admit, and of course, I'm going to have to invite you on. We're getting into Joe Rogan territory. This is not a long form podcast, but I'm definitely going to have to have you back if you would come. But what I was going to say is that I have not even gone to the Suno site yet. I mean, I find it fascinating to talk about, and I talk about it with a lot of musicians. Of course, our EntreMusician community and what Margot Fitzgerald specifically is doing with it, and how she's using it, and what I heard when you came on. Just amazing stuff. However, there's still that thing in me that says, well, I would rather do it. And that's, again, the spirit of who I am, not the moral, not the legal, not the whether Barry or any other company is going to take it or not. It's just how I'm wired at this moment. I agree with you. It's not going away. I agree with you. It's not something that should be feared, or you should be petrified, or you should be even angry at. You should adapt, and you should learn how to use it as a tool, right? Because a hammer, a hammer can be used for good or bad. If you're using this tool the right way, it can do good and it can advance your career.
Well, this is
Maybe the
economic.
next time. Well, that's true.
It's
But
economic. It's not like you're having to make a moral choice about a Holocaust or something.
well, true.
Just
That's
because
true.
somebody has created a technology that'll kill 6 million people, then that's a whole different subject.
Certainly.
This is a question of how we solve the economic problems that are inherent in the coming of AI.
Yeah. But it's interesting, and this will get us to our next conversation. You promised to come back on, Don,
I
and let me
promise.
hold you. Okay, because the thing that you just said, I mean, yes, you are absolutely right. The issue is the SIP and the big circle that you drew, in the fact that, okay, here is another piece of technology that you slide in there that you have to pay for, because the songwriter gets paid last. It goes around the circle, and so now you're paying $30 for this and $25 for that and $8.99 for that a month. And then you're going, at the end of the day, well, at the fractions of a penny,
Ask me
what do
what
I
I make
do
per stream.
economically? Well, we can compare notes on
That
those.
answers the question.
Exactly
You know,
right. Exactly.
point
So
0.4 a stream or some silliness.
that's right. Because golly, see, I'm going to end the conversation here, because we were having another conversation on Black Friday, and Black Friday is when musicians buy all the plugins that are half off and whatnot. But the question becomes, who needs another equalizer? Who needs another reverb, for God's sake? Even if it's $15.99, and if you look at your last statement from streaming, did you make the $15.99 that this reverb is costing you? There we go. I'm so grateful, though, that you came to talk to us, man, and you are really a valued voice, and I love the balance. I love what you bring to the table, as one who uses it, as one who, because you're an attorney, know the logistics and the legalities that are concerned, and you can help take the emotion out of the conversation. That's what I really dig about you, man. I appreciate
Listen,
it.
next time, don't forget to ask me about ownership of this Suno creation business and what
Okay.
in other words, about the contract that exists between me and Suno. because that's also an important part of this whole construct.
Well, we're going to start with that
All right.
question right there.
All right. Very good.
Thank you so much, Don, for joining us, man. That's going to do it for this episode of the EntreMusician. You see, this is a gentleman I can talk to for hours and hours and hours on end. So grateful for him. Check his music out at solidsterlingmusic.com. That's Don Tomlinson. 600 incredible tracks. He's a wonderful songwriter. Next time we'll talk about that too, the essence of his songwriting and where his stories come from musically. But that's going to do it for today. Check out the EntreMusician.com. Join us, become a member, and you can have an opportunity to talk to people like Don and Barry and other fabulous music industry pros who come in and answer our questions directly. My name is Jerry B. Grateful to be here with you. Thanks for joining us. I'm an EntreMusician, but here's what I was going to say. You know what's most important? You are too. You are an EntreMusician. Go ahead and make it happen. Peace and blessings to you, and we'll see you again next time. God bless.